Chapter 1. The Arrival of the Unseen. The Outpost of Verden sat on the very fringe of human-colonized space, a dusty and forgotten place where routine was the norm. And the most exciting event was the arrival of supply shuttles from the central colonies every few months. Nestled in the vast wilderness of planet Graxis, 5, Verden was isolated. The dense forests that surrounded it stretched out like a sea of green, with towering trees whose branches intertwined to form an almost impenetrable canopy. The settlers were mostly miners, engineers, and a few biologists sent to study the native flora. Life was simple, even if it was unforgiving at times. For many, that's exactly what they wanted: an escape from the bustling chaos of the core worlds. But the peace that Verden enjoyed was shattered one fateful evening. It started as a low rumble in the distance, the kind that made the very ground vibrate beneath their feet. The settlers, scattered in their daily routines, paused. At first, they thought it was another earthquake, not uncommon in the region due to the planet's volatile tectonics. But as the rumble grew louder and the sky began to darken, they realized something far stranger was happening. From the west, a streak of brilliant light shot across the sky, leaving a fiery trail in its wake. The object was descending fast, hurtling toward the forest. It wasn't a meteor; its movements were too controlled, too deliberate. Whatever it was not a natural phenomenon. The object crashed into the forest with a thunderous roar that could be heard for miles, sending a shockwave that flattened trees and rattled windows in the settlement. A plume of black smoke rose into the sky, casting a shadow over the forest. For several moments, there was nothing but stunned silence. Then, the panic set in. The outpost's comm station was flooded with reports. People claimed to have seen everything from an alien invasion to a military test gone wrong. Speculation ran wild. The town's governing council quickly convened, trying to maintain order, but it was clear they had no idea what to do. They sent out a drone to investigate the crash site, but within minutes, the drone's signal was lost. "That's no ordinary ship," muttered one of the technicians, his voice trembling. "Something's wrong out there." The council debated for hours, finally agreeing to send a small, armed reconnaissance team into the forest. But as the hours dragged on and night fell, there was still no word from the team. The tension in Verden thickened. People started to whisper about the legends of this planet, the stories of the original settlers who vanished without a trace centuries ago. Graxis, 5 had always had a dark history, but now, those tales seemed frighteningly real. For Dane Malik, however, this was the moment he had been waiting for his entire life. Unlike most of the settlers, Dane wasn't a miner or an engineer. He was a freelance xenobiologist, and one of the few who had come to Graxis, 5 with a deep sense of curiosity. While others saw the planet's dangers, he saw its mysteries. He had spent years studying the life forms of distant planets, hoping to be the one who made contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. And now, with the crash of an unknown ship in the forest, he felt that his moment had finally arrived. As the outpost descended into a state of nervous anticipation, Dane gathered his equipment. A backpack filled with sensor devices, translators, and field tools sat next to the door of his small lab. His heart raced with a mixture of excitement and fear. He knew the risks, but the thrill of discovery was too great to ignore. If this was indeed an alien ship, then it was the most significant event in human history. The opportunity to make first contact was one that he couldn't pass up, no matter the danger. He was packing when he heard the knock at his door. It was Commander Riggs, the leader of the outpost security force. Riggs was a no-nonsense man, built like a brick wall and just as stubborn. He had never liked Dane, thinking of him as an unnecessary addition to the outpost. To Riggs, Dane was just a bookworm, someone who had no place on the frontier. But even Riggs looked nervous tonight. "You're not thinking of going out there, are you?" Riggs asked, his deep voice edged with concern. Dane glanced at the pack by the door and shrugged. "Of course I am. This could be the moment we've been waiting for. If there's a chance to communicate, to learn, we can't pass that up." Riggs shook his head, clearly frustrated. "You're a damn fool if you think it's that simple. We've already lost a drone and a team out there. That ship, whatever it is, it's not like anything we've seen before. We don't know if it's hostile. Hell, we don't even know what's inside." "And that's exactly why I need to go," Dane replied. "We can't just sit here and do nothing. What if they're trying to communicate? What if they need help? We won't know until someone makes contact. Riggs stared at him for a long moment, then sighed. I can't stop you, but I won't be sending a rescue party if you don't come back. You're on your own. Dane nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. I wouldn't expect anything less. With that, Riggs left, leaving Dane alone in the dimly lit room. He finished packing his gear, double-checking everything one last time. The excitement in his chest had not diminished, but there was now an undercurrent of anxiety. The unknown was thrilling, but it was also terrifying. The thought of what might await him in the forest, the unknown entities that could be lurking inside the ship, kept his mind racing. Stepping outside, the cold night air bit at his skin. The distant smoke from the crash site still billowed into the sky, illuminated faintly by the moonlight. Dane began his trek toward the forest, his path lit only by the small beam of his handheld scanner. The forest was eerily silent, as if the very wildlife had sensed the presence of something unnatural and fled. Every step he took felt heavier, the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. After about an hour of hiking, he reached the edge of the crash site. The massive ship lay half buried in the earth, its exterior scorched from the crash. It was unlike anything Dane had ever seen before. The material of the hull shimmered with an iridescent glow, shifting colors as if alive. Strange symbols, indecipherable and alien, were etched into the surface, glowing faintly in the dark. His breath caught in his throat as he slowly approached. The silence was deafening. No movement, no sounds from within. It was as if the ship itself were holding its breath, waiting for something or someone. With cautious steps, Dane reached out to touch the hull. His fingers brushed against the smooth surface, and to his surprise, the metal felt warm. A sudden shiver ran down his spine. He didn't know whether it was fear or anticipation. And then, there was a sound. A low, guttural growl, emanating from deep within the ship. It was a sound that made every hair on the back of Dane's neck stand on end. Something was inside. Something big. Dane swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. There was no turning back now. Chapter 2. The Encounter. The ship's low, guttural growl seemed to reverberate in the very air around Dane. For a moment, he stood frozen in place, his outstretched hand still resting on the shimmering hull of the alien vessel. He had expected many things, perhaps a cold, lifeless wreck or a technologically advanced ship brimming with data he could study. But this primal sound was not part of his calculations. Something was alive in there. His heart raced in his chest as he pulled his hand away from the warm metal, instinctively taking a step back. The forest around him felt darker, more oppressive, as if the crash site itself were a living, breathing entity watching his every move. Dane's rational mind kicked in, urging him to turn back, to run. But something else, the part of him that had always yearned for discovery, for the unknown, kept him rooted to the spot. He couldn't leave now, not when he was so close. Dane took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He reached into his pack and pulled out his handheld scanner, a device designed to detect biological and technological signals. As the scanner powered up, its soft blue light illuminated the ship's surface in front of him. The display flickered for a moment before settling on a reading. There were life signs, faint, but unmistakable. Dane's pulse quickened. His hypothesis had been correct. There were living beings inside the ship. But how many? And what kind of life forms were they? The scanner didn't give him those details. He could only guess. He approached the ship once again, this time cautiously stepping around to what appeared to be a breach in the hull. The crash had torn a jagged hole in the side of the vessel, large enough for him to climb through. He peered inside, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The interior of the ship was a maze of twisted metal, wires, and shattered technology. Sparks flickered from broken panels, casting eerie shadows across the walls. But what caught Dane's attention was the trail of deep, claw-like marks along the floor and walls, as if something or someone had dragged themselves through the wreckage. The growling sound came again, this time closer. It was followed by a heavy, labored breathing. Dane's throat went dry, but he pressed on, forcing himself to climb through the breach and into the ship. His boots crunched on debris as he navigated the wrecked interior. Every few steps, his flashlight would flicker, the energy of the ship's strange materials interfering with the light. The further he went, the more the temperature seemed to drop, as if the very air inside the ship had been leached of warmth. And then he saw it. In the dim light, at the far end of the corridor, a massive figure was slumped against the wall. Even from this distance, Dane could see that the creature was enormous, at least 8 feet tall, its body covered in a sleek, dark exoskeleton that shimmered with the same iridescent glow as the ship's exterior. Its limbs were long and powerful, ending in sharp, clawed digits. But the most striking feature was its face's strange, insectoid visage with multiple eyes, some of which were cracked and leaking a thick, dark fluid. The creature was injured. Dane froze, his breath caught in his throat. The alien's labored breathing filled the corridor, and its many eyes blinked sluggishly, as if it were struggling to stay conscious. For a moment, they locked eyes, and Dane felt a strange connection, a mutual recognition of vulnerability. This was no invader, no hostile conqueror. This creature was hurt, possibly dying. Slowly, cautiously, Dane lowered his flashlight and took a step forward. The alien growled again, but this time it was weaker, less aggressive. It was a warning, not an attack. Dane raised his hands in a gesture of peace, showing the creature that he meant no harm. "I'm here to help," he said softly, though he wasn't sure if the creature could understand him. His voice echoed in the empty corridor. "I'm a biologist. I can treat wounds. If you'll let me." The alien didn't move. Its eyes, some cracked and bleeding, simply watched him with a mix of wariness and exhaustion. Dane could see the tension in its massive frame, the way its claws dug into the metal floor as if preparing for a last-ditch defense. It was scared, cornered like a wounded animal. Dane slowly approached, careful to keep his movements deliberate and non-threatening. His mind raced through the possibilities. This creature was unlike anything he had ever studied, but its physiology seemed similar enough to other carbon-based life forms he had encountered in his research. He knelt a few feet away from the alien, setting his pack down on the floor and retrieving his medkit. The creature's eyes followed his every movement, but it made no effort to attack. Perhaps it understood that he wasn't a threat, or perhaps it was simply too weak to do anything but watch. Dane opened the medkit and pulled out a syringe filled with a regenerative serum, a cocktail of compounds designed to accelerate healing in a wide range of organisms. He wasn't sure if it would work on this alien, but it was the best option he had. "I'm going to inject you with this," he said, holding up the syringe for the alien to see. "It'll help your wounds heal. I don't know if you can understand me, but just stay calm." The alien growled again, a low rumble that vibrated through the floor, but it didn't move. Taking that as permission, or at least a lack of objection, Dane carefully approached the creature. Up close, he could see the extent of its injuries. Deep gashes ran along its exoskeleton, leaking the same dark fluid that oozed from its cracked eyes. One of its arms was bent at an unnatural angle, and several of its legs seemed to have been crushed in the crash. He gently pressed the syringe against a patch of exposed flesh near the alien's neck and injected the serum. The alien tensed, its muscles tightening in response, but after a few moments, it relaxed. Dane stepped back, watching for any signs of reaction. The serum wouldn't work instantly, but it should at least stabilize the creature and promote healing over time. For several tense minutes, neither of them moved. Dane could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears as he waited, watching the alien for any sign of change. And then, slowly, the creature's breathing began to steady. Its many eyes blinked in unison, some of the cracks in its exoskeleton starting to close as the regenerative serum took effect. The alien shifted slightly, adjusting its position against the wall, and for the first time, Dane saw a flicker of understanding in its gaze. "You're going to be okay," Dane whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was reassuring the alien or himself. "Just rest. I'll stay here with you." The alien didn't respond, but its eyes remained fixed on Dane, no longer filled with fear or aggression. Instead, there was something else in its gaze, a quiet, unspoken acknowledgement. In that moment, Dane knew that he had made contact, not with words, but with something deeper, trust. But as the night deepened, and the silence of the forest pressed in around them, Dane couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The creature before him was not just a victim of circumstance, was part of something much larger, something that could change the course of humanity's place in the galaxy. And somewhere, out there in the darkness, others were watching. Chapter 3. Unraveling the Mystery. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the thick canopy of trees outside the crash site, the strange alien vessel cast long, eerie shadows across the forest floor. Dane hadn't slept all night. He had stayed by the alien side, observing as the regenerative serum slowly worked its way through the creature's system, repairing its shattered exoskeleton and stabilizing its vitals. The faint hum of the ship's remaining systems filled the air, though it was clear the vessel had suffered catastrophic damage in the crash. The alien's eyes, though still cracked in places, now glowed softly, watching him with an intensity that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. It hadn't spoken or made any gestures to communicate in the traditional sense, but there was a growing awareness between them, a silent understanding that passed between their gazes. Dane had always believed that first contact would be something monumental, a grand exchange of culture, science, and knowledge between species. But here he was, alone in the wreckage of an alien ship, tending to a creature that seemed more vulnerable than formidable. He wondered what kind of society this alien had come from. Was it part of a crew? A scout for a larger fleet? Or was it something else entirely, something stranded, far from home? The crash had left more questions than answers. Dane rose to his feet, stretching his tired limbs. The alien, still leaning against the wall, followed his movements closely, but made no attempt to stop him. With a wary glance back at the creature, Dane decided it was time to explore more of the ship. There had to be something here that could give him more insight into what had happened, some clue to the alien's identity or purpose. "Stay here," he said quietly, though he wasn't sure why he was talking to it. The alien blinked slowly, almost as if acknowledging his words. Dane took a few steps deeper into the ship's interior, careful not to disturb the twisted wreckage that cluttered the floor. The corridors were narrow and dimly lit, the alien technology casting a faint, ghostly glow. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before. The ship's design was organic in nature. Its walls seemed to pulse with life, as if the entire vessel was a living organism rather than a mechanical construct. The deeper he went, the more the ship began to reveal its secrets. Strange symbols adorned the walls, etched into the surface with a precision that suggested an advanced civilization. Some symbols pulsed with a faint light, others flickered, their meaning lost to time or damage. Dane's handheld scanner was useless here. Whatever technology powered this ship interfered with its readings. He could only rely on his instincts. As he turned a corner, he found what he had been looking for, a control room. The room was in disarray, much like the rest of the ship, but there were still signs of functionality. A large, circular console sat in the center, its surface covered in the same strange symbols he had seen in the corridors. Several monitors lined the walls, most of them shattered or dark, but one flickered faintly, its display filled with alien script. Dane approached the console cautiously, his fingers hovering over the glowing symbols. He had no idea how to operate this technology, but if there was any chance of finding out more about the alien, it would be here. He hesitated for a moment, then tapped one of the symbols that seemed to pulse more brightly than the others. The ship responded immediately. The lights in the control room flickered, and a low hum filled the air. The monitors came to life, displaying streams of data in a language that was entirely foreign to him. He stared at the screens, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. There were charts, maps, and what appeared to be detailed diagrams of the ship itself. But it was the images on one of the monitors that caught his attention. It was a star map. Dane leaned in closer, studying the unfamiliar constellations. The map showed a series of planets, each marked with different symbols, but there was one planet in particular that was highlighted, a world that seemed to be at the center of the alien's journey. Graxis 5. His heart skipped a beat. This ship had been heading for Graxis 5 deliberately. But why? Was it an exploration mission? Or something more sinister? Dane's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden surge of energy through the ship. The lights brightened, and the hum of the systems grew louder. He stepped back from the console, his pulse quickening. Something was happening. The ship was coming back online. Before he could react, a deep, resonant voice echoed through the control room, speaking in the same alien language that filled the screens. Dane couldn't understand the words, but there was no mistaking the tone. It was a warning. And then he felt a presence behind him. Slowly, he turned to find the alien standing in the doorway. It had risen to its full height, towering over him at 8 feet tall, its insectoid features glowing faintly in the light of the control room. Its multiple eyes were locked onto the screens, a mixture of recognition and alarm flashing in their depths. The creature stepped forward, moving with surprising grace for something so large. It approached the console, brushing past Dane as it did so, and began tapping the symbols with its long, clawed fingers. The ship responded instantly, its systems powering up with a renewed sense of urgency. Dane watched in awe as the alien worked. It moved with a fluidity that belied its injuries, its claws dancing over the controls with precision. It was clear now that this was no mindless creature, this was a being of intelligence and purpose. The crash hadn't been an accident. The alien paused, turning its gaze to Dane. For a moment, their eyes met, and in that brief connection, Dane felt a wave of emotion wash over him, fear, frustration, and a deep sense of loss. The alien's thoughts were a jumbled mess, but there was one message that came through clearly. It was warning him. Something was coming. Before Dane could process the meaning of the warning, the ship's systems surged to life. The monitors flashed red, and the voice from earlier spoke again, more urgently this time. The alien growled, frustration evident in its posture. It tapped a few more symbols, and the star map zoomed in on Graxis 5. Dane's breath caught in his throat as the map shifted, revealing a series of flashing icon ships, dozens of them, moving toward the planet's surface. They were part of a larger fleet, converging on Graxis 5 with alarming speed. This was an invasion, Dane whispered, his mind reeling from the realization. The alien had been part of a scouting mission, and now, its fleet was coming to finish what it had started. The alien turned to him again, its eyes filled with a strange mixture of regret and urgency. It gestured toward the screen, then pointed to the exit. Dane didn't need to understand the alien's language to know what it was saying. They needed to leave. Now, without another word, Dane grabbed his pack and followed the alien out of the control room, his mind racing. The realization that Graxis 5 was about to be invaded had hit him like a ton of bricks. He had to warn the settlement, but how could he explain this? How could he convince them that an advanced alien race was on its way to destroy their outpost? As they made their way through the wrecked corridors, Dane couldn't shake the feeling that things were spiraling out of control. This was no longer about first contact, this was about survival. And the alien by his side, once a wounded and vulnerable creature, was now his only ally. The two of them emerged from the wrecked ship into the light of day. The forest was quiet, but there was an ominous tension in the air, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. Dane turned to the alien, who stood tall and still, scanning the horizon with its many eyes. For the first time, Dane spoke with a sense of finality. "We need to warn them. They won't believe me, but we have to try." The alien didn't respond in words, but it nodded slowly, a gesture that conveyed its understanding. Together, they began the trek back to Verden, a strange partnership forged in the shadow of an impending disaster. But as they moved through the forest, Dane couldn't help but wonder, was it already too late? Chapter 4. The Last Stand. The forest passed by in a blur as Dane and the alien rushed through the underbrush toward the settlement. Dane's heart pounded in his chest, and every step felt heavier as the weight of what he had seen settled in his mind. The alien fleet was coming. He didn't know how much time they had left, but it wasn't much. The quiet settlement of Verden, nestled in the wilderness of Graxis 5, was about to be the epicenter of something far greater than any of its settlers could have imagined. The alien, now fully upright and moving with renewed strength, kept pace with Dane easily. Though it was massive, towering over him at 8 feet tall, it moved with a fluidity and grace that surprised him. Its insectoid limbs clicked softly on the forest floor, and its multiple eyes scanned the surroundings, ever alert. Dane could sense the urgency in its movements. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about stopping the impending catastrophe. As the trees thinned and the settlement came into view, Dane's breath caught in his throat. Verden looked peaceful, the smoke from chimneys rising into the morning sky, with settlers going about their routines, completely unaware of the disaster looming over them. It was hard to believe that in just a short time, this quiet place could be obliterated by an alien fleet that had misunderstood their intentions. "They don't know," Dane muttered to himself, shaking his head. "They have no idea." The alien beside him let out a low, guttural sound, a warning, perhaps, or a gesture of acknowledgement. It pointed toward the sky, where dark clouds were gathering, and then gestured toward the settlement, its movements tense and urgent. Dane took a deep breath and approached the main gate of the outpost. The guards stationed there, rough-looking men with rifles slung over their shoulders, immediately straightened when they saw the alien walking beside him. Their faces quickly shifted from confusion to alarm as they raised their weapons. "Hold it right there," one of the guards barked, stepping forward. "What the hell is that thing doing here?" Dane raised his hands, trying to calm them. "Wait, don't shoot. It's not here to hurt anyone." The guard, a grizzled man named Jorin, narrowed his eyes. "You expect us to believe that? That thing looks like it could tear us apart." "It's not a threat," Dane insisted, his voice urgent. "Listen, this alien is part of a scouting mission, but its fleet is coming. An entire fleet of ships is heading toward Graxis 5. They think we attacked their scout, and they're coming to retaliate. We need to prepare." Jorin's expression shifted from suspicion to disbelief. "You're saying there's an invasion coming? Malik, have you lost your mind?" Dane stepped forward, desperation creeping into his voice. "I'm telling you the truth. I was inside the alien ship. Their fleet is already on its way. If we don't act now, we're all going to be wiped out." For a moment, the guard hesitated, glancing at his fellow sentries. Behind them, settlers began to gather, drawn by the commotion. Dane could hear their whispers, the murmurs of fear and confusion. His heart raced. He didn't have time for this. "I need to speak to Commander Riggs," Dane said, his voice firm. "He needs to hear this." Jorin exchanged a look with the other guards, then nodded. "Fine, but if you're wrong about this—" "I'm not," Dane said firmly. The gates creaked open, and Dane led the alien inside the settlement. People gasped as the towering creature passed by, some backing away in fear, others whispering in awe. Dane's mind raced as he hurried toward the command center. He had to convince Riggs to act quickly. The alien fleet wouldn't wait. As they approached the central building, Commander Riggs emerged, flanked by several security officers. His sharp eyes scanned the situation, lingering on the alien before settling on Dane. "Malik," Riggs said, his voice heavy with suspicion. "What the hell is going on here? And why is that thing walking through my settlement?" Dane stepped forward, urgency filling his voice. "Commander, listen to me. This alien isn't our enemy, but its fleet is coming. They think we attacked their scout ship, and they're on their way to retaliate. We don't have much time." Riggs crossed his arms, his expression hard and skeptical. "An alien fleet? You're telling me that this thing came here with a whole invasion force, but it's not here to attack us?" "The crash wasn't intentional," Dane explained. "The alien was injured, and I helped it. But its people are coming because they think we're a threat. If we don't do something, if we don't show them we're not hostile, they'll destroy the settlement." For a long moment, Riggs said nothing. His eyes flicked between Dane and the alien, his mind clearly working through the possibilities. The tension in the air was thick, and the crowd of settlers that had gathered around them watched with bated breath. Finally, Riggs let out a long sigh. "Fine. If you say this fleet is coming, we'll get the defenses up. But if this goes wrong, Malik, it's on your head." Dane nodded, relief washing over him. "Thank you, Commander. We can stop this if we act now." Riggs barked orders to his officers, who quickly sprang into action, preparing the settlement's defensive systems. The settlers, now fully aware of the impending danger, began to scatter, seeking shelter or helping to reinforce the outpost's walls. But Dane's relief was short-lived. The alien beside him let out a low, warning growl and pointed toward the sky. Dane looked up and his heart sank. The first of the alien ships appeared through the clouds, its massive, metallic form blotting out the sun. It hovered above the settlement like a dark omen, its engines rumbling like distant thunder. Behind it, more ships followed, sleek and menacing, their shadows casting a pall over the outpost. "They're here," Dane whispered, his voice barely audible. Commander Riggs swore under his breath. "Get everyone inside. Now." Panic spread like wildfire through the settlement as people rushed for cover. The massive alien ship hovered ominously above them, its presence filling the air with a sense of impending doom. Dane could feel the vibrations of its engines beneath his feet, and for a moment, everything seemed to stand still. And then the ship fired. A beam of light shot down from the lead vessel, striking the ground just outside the settlement's perimeter. The impact sent a shockwave through the air, knocking several people to the ground. The earth trembled beneath the force of the blast, and a cloud of dust rose into the sky. Dane's heart pounded in his chest as he turned to the alien beside him. It was watching the ship, its many eyes narrowed, its posture tense. It growled softly, a sound that sent chills down Dane's spine. "They're waiting for a response," Dane realized, his voice filled with desperation. "They don't want to destroy us, not yet." Riggs turned to Dane, his expression hard. "You better be right about this." Dane swallowed hard. He knew what he had to do. Without a word, he stepped forward, moving toward the edge of the settlement, where the beam of light had struck the ground. The alien followed close behind, its gaze never leaving the ship above. Dane's hands shook as he reached the edge of the blast zone, his eyes locked on the massive vessel hovering above him. He raised his hands in the air, palms open, a universal gesture of peace. "We're not your enemy," he shouted, his voice echoing through the silence. "We didn't attack your scout." For a long, terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the light from the lead ship began to dim. The rumble of its engines quieted, and the massive vessel seemed to pull back, as if reconsidering its next move. Dane's heart raced. Was it working? Were they listening? The alien beside him stepped forward, raising its own hand, a gesture that mirrored Dane's. Its many eyes glowed softly, and for the first time, Dane felt a sense of calm wash over him. The alien wasn't just a scout, it was a bridge between their species. The silence stretched on, and the tension in the air was suffocating. But then, slowly, the alien ships began to retreat, their sleek forms pulling back into the sky. The rumble of their engines faded into the distance, and the light from the lead ship disappeared. It was over. Dane let out a long, shaky breath, his body trembling with relief. The alien beside him lowered its hand, its posture relaxing. For the first time, Dane felt like they had truly understood each other. Commander Riggs approached, his face a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. "I don't know how you pulled that off, Malik," he said, shaking his head, "but you just saved this settlement." Dane smiled weakly, exhaustion washing over him. "I didn't do it alone," he said, glancing at the alien. "We did it together." The alien let out a soft clicking sound, perhaps its version of approval, and then turned its gaze toward the sky, where its people had disappeared. Dane knew that this was only the beginning. Humanity and the aliens had made contact, and while the danger had passed for now, the future was uncertain. But for the first time in his life, Dane felt hope. The alien's eyes, still glowing faintly, shifted back to Dane. The connection between them, though built in desperation, felt genuine. They had found a way to communicate, a way to stop the violence before it started. And now, standing in the aftermath of the near catastrophe, Dane knew this encounter was the beginning of something far bigger than just the survival of Verden. Commander Riggs crossed his arms, his expression hardening again as he addressed Dane and the alien. "All right, Malik, you've bought us some time, but that doesn't mean the threat is over. We've got a settlement to protect, and those ships could come back any minute. What do we do now?" Dane exhaled slowly, still shaken but resolute. "We need to keep talking. There's a misunderstanding between us and them. If we can clear it up, we might avoid a full-scale war." Riggs raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "Talk? You think they're going to listen to reason? That they'll just forget they were ready to vaporize us?" Dane turned to the alien, who stood tall and quiet beside him. It had shown incredible restraint and, more importantly, trust in him. He looked back at Riggs. "It's not about forgetting. It's about finding common ground. The alien trusted me enough to help stop this attack. We need to build on that trust." Riggs rubbed his chin, his brow furrowing as he thought. "Let's say you're right. Let's say they're not coming back with a vengeance. How do you even begin to negotiate with them?" Dane's gaze shifted back to the alien. It had been communicating through body language, gestures, and even shared emotion, but there had to be a more advanced form of communication. Something in the ship systems, or maybe the alien's technology, could be the key. He remembered the symbols he had seen on the ship's monitors, the way the alien had interacted with the console. It was clear they were capable of sophisticated communication. "We need to go back to the ship," Dane said, determination settling into his voice. There might be technology there that can help us communicate more effectively. Something we can use to reach their fleet directly. Riggs scowled, clearly not thrilled with the idea of sending people back into the crash site. But before he could argue, the alien stepped forward, gesturing toward the forest in the direction of the downed vessel. It let out a soft, low hum, a sound that seemed almost cooperative. Dane nodded at the alien. It's trying to tell us the same thing. The ship holds the answers. Commander Riggs studied them both for a long moment, his arms crossed over his chest. The silence that followed felt like an eternity, and Dane could sense the weight of the decision Riggs had to make. Finally, with a heavy sigh, Riggs nodded. Fine, he said, his voice firm, but I'm sending a team with you. If this is a trap... It's not, Dane said quickly, cutting him off. We have to trust each other if we're going to survive this. With Riggs' reluctant approval, Dane and the alien led a small group back into the forest, heading toward the wrecked ship. The air was thick with tension as they moved through the dense foliage, the soldiers accompanying them casting wary glances at the towering alien who walked silently beside them. But Dane knew, deep down, that the alien meant them no harm. When they reached the ship, the scene was just as haunting as it had been when Dane first arrived. The massive vessel lay half buried in the earth, its twisted metal hull shimmering faintly in the fading light. The breach in the side of the ship where Dane had entered was still open, the iridescent surface glowing softly in the shadows. This is it, Dane said, glancing at the alien. There has to be something in there we can use. The alien stepped forward, leading them through the breach and into the ship's dimly lit corridors. As they made their way toward the control room, Dane's mind raced. What kind of technology did the ship hold? Was there a way to establish direct communication with the alien fleet? And more importantly, could they do it before the fleet decided to strike again? When they reached the control room, the alien moved swiftly, tapping into the console's interface with ease. The symbols on the monitors glowed brighter, and a soft hum filled the air as the ship's systems began to reactivate. Dane watched in awe as the alien worked, its long, clawed fingers moving deftly over the controls. After a few moments, one of the monitors displayed the same star map Dane had seen earlier, the map of Graxis, 5, and the surrounding space. But this time, the ships of the alien fleet were marked clearly, their positions shown in real time as they hovered above the planet. We can reach them, Dane whispered, a sense of hope rising in his chest. The alien tapped a few more symbols, and the star map zoomed in on the fleet. A communication channel opened, and the soft hum of the ship's systems grew louder. Dane's heart pounded in his chest as the alien turned to him, its many eyes glowing with anticipation. Dane took a deep breath. This was at the moment of truth. We need to send a message, he said, his voice steady. Something that shows them we're not a threat. The alien gestured toward the console, and a series of symbols appeared on the screen. Dane couldn't understand the language, but he could feel the intent behind the alien's actions. It was offering him control, letting him speak to its people. With a trembling hand, Dane reached out and touched the console. The symbols flickered for a moment, and then the screen shifted to display a live feed from one of the alien ships. The bridge of the vessel was dark and ominous, filled with shadowy figures that watched him from across the void. Dane's breath caught in his throat, but he forced himself to speak. We are not your enemies, he said slowly, unsure if they would even understand his words. The crash was an accident. We didn't attack your scout. We want peace. For a long, agonizing moment, there was silence. The figures on the screen remained still, their faces unreadable. Dane's heart pounded in his chest as he waited for a response, every second feeling like an eternity. Then, finally, one of the figures stepped forward. Its features were similar to the alien standing beside Dane, tall, insectoid, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the screen. It raised a hand, and a series of symbols appeared on the monitor. Dane glanced at the alien beside him. What is it saying? The alien stepped closer to the console and tapped a few symbols. The message translated into human language, appearing on the screen in front of Dane. We have heard your message. Stand down. We will not attack. Relief flooded through Dane's body, and he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The alien fleet had listened. They had stopped the attack. It was over. The figure on the screen nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, and then the communication feed cut out. The star map returned, showing the fleet slowly pulling back from Graxis. 5. Dane turned to the alien beside him, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "We did it," he said softly. "We stopped them." The alien clicked softly, its eyes glowing with a sense of quiet satisfaction. They had achieved what seemed impossible. They had averted war. But Dane knew this was only the beginning. Humanity and this alien species had made contact, and while the immediate danger had passed, the future was still uncertain. As they made their way out of the ship, back into the light of the forest, Dane felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. The alliance he had forged with the alien had saved countless lives today, and perhaps it would lead to something far greater in the future. For now, though, all he could do was look up at the sky and wonder what lay beyond the stars.